Daja hao, ne hawa, kia ora koutou katoa. I thought because you've been sitting for a while, actually, I'll start by asking you all to stand up, if you don't mind. And I'm going to test your knowledge, and some of you are, oh, your broken bones, your sore backs there. Simon Limmer is not used to sitting that long without a glass of wine in his hand. I thought I'd test your knowledge on a couple of things. First of all, could you all raise your right hand in the air, and then when I tell you to, could you point to China? No one. No, you don't know. You're all. It's basically that way and then down a bit, obviously. If you pointed that way, I'll give it to you as well, because that is where, of course, the airport is. So you'd need to go there first. But okay, next question. Stay standing if you, because I'm about to tell you about what the Chinese perceptions are of New Zealand. And many of you in the room, of course, will know this. But stay standing if you think the predominant Chinese perception. Actually, no, I'll put it the other way. Sit down if you think the main thing that China knows about us is our rugby. Okay, good. All right, we're just making sure I'm in the right room. I didn't get to Eden Park by mistake. Okay, sit down if you think the predominant thing that the Chinese perceive of New Zealand is our clean, green environment. Okay. Many of you. Sit down if you think the main thing that the Chinese perceptions are of New Zealand is of our wonderful food and beverage. Okay. Sit down if you think the main thing that the Chinese know about us is our Māori culture. Okay? Sit down, final one this time, if you, stay standing I should say, if you think that Chinese perceptions of New Zealand are that one-dimensional, that any one of those is the predominant factor. Because the answer is, of course, no. So you can sit down. The reality is, of course, a much more nuanced perceptions of New Zealand. And I hope that I gave you a little bit of oxygen there just to get you the last 15 minutes going. So I'm David. I'm the CEO of this amazing organisation. We're lucky to represent New Zealand to the world. We're a joint venture of government agencies. And our role is to share New Zealand stories with the world in order to change their perceptions and enhance their view of New Zealand. And perceptions are a really big part of what we do. Perceptions really matter. They are the things that build relationships between nations. They allow us to really understand each other in a way that when we're marketing or selling our products and services, we start with a really strong basis of fact. And so there's a lot of opinion about what goes on. Many of you will have lived experience, but actually what we hope is that we can share information of the changing nature of perceptions of New Zealand in China. Now, we start this by starting at a very high level. We look at a quantitative analysis. So quantitative research is where you go out and ask an enormous number of people a basic set of questions, and from that you can start to derive some insights. So 193 countries were surveyed, over 170,000 people, clearly quite a lot of them in China, and we asked them about perceptions of New Zealand. So we have a lot of data about what other countries think about New Zealand. If I drill in on that, and Fran just talked about soft power. Soft power is one of the ways that we measure perception of a country. So New Zealand enjoys typically a much higher ranking in the global soft power rankings than other countries of our size. We're very lucky that we're perceived positively, number 25 in the world. But if you go into China, actually it's even more so. New Zealand is perceived very positively in China. 14th in reputation. I can just see we've got white on white text there in this version, so it's a bit hard to read. But basically what that last number there I think is probably the most important, 14th. What that's actually saying is that it's called a recommendation metric. And to what extent do Chinese consumers, and these are consumers in this particular survey, to what extent would they recommend New Zealand as a place to visit, as a place to send your kids to go to university or school, as a place to trade with, all those sorts of things. So to have the 14th most, if you like, recommended of any country in the world is substantial. Once we have this sort of quantitative data, this big data set, it gives you clues about the sorts of questions you should ask if you had more time, and that's what we do next. Basically, we dive in and start asking smaller groups, and this data has come out this year, smaller groups, more qualitative information. So based on that information, you can understand what you want to learn in a bit more detail. So first of all, we ask, what do Chinese citizens think of themselves? Because it's a good starting point to understand how they're feeling and thinking about themselves. And for anyone that's been in China in the last few years will know that there's been a really resurgence in national pride, in a feeling that China is really moving forward, that they're leading in the world, really a patriotism that hasn't necessarily been there many years ago. but also that they're mischaracterized, they're misunderstood by the rest of the world. And so part of it is, when you're thinking about selling into China or forming partnerships with China, understanding how their perceptions are of us is quite important. Largely, those perceptions are really positive. And you can see there, they see us as having high quality food and beverage, stable politics, strong education systems, those sorts of things, but also a leisurely pace of life. And these are things that we as Kiwis, we look at this and we go, feel good about ourselves. And by the way, we'll share these slides later on because there's quite a lot of data in behind them. We feel good about ourselves when we see these positive perceptions of New Zealand because that's kind of how we like to see ourselves as well. But as some wise people have often said, you should live in fear of your own strengths because sometimes the very strengths we have are also our weaknesses. So when we think about those positive perceptions, if you look at the flip side of them, they can turn into perceptions of, for example, New Zealand not being a highly industrialised nation, perhaps being not so technologically advanced, and perhaps we're a country that prioritises lifestyle over growth. And in some parts of the world, we're seen, as being too laid back, maybe a little bit too Kiwiana. And so that is part of the challenge. And certainly when we do these qualitative surveys, people, that is one of the challenges that we see in the data. In terms of sectors, and I'm moving fast because I've got this clock ticking down on me. In terms of sectors, some sectors of New Zealand are very highly understood and well understood and admired. Tourism, of course, dairy, fruit, education is highly admired, but less so things like honey, skincare, and very much less so anything to do with sort of technological sophistication, so science and technology, even our visual effects industry. So our job to do, I think, is to actually lift perceptions in areas where there's lesser known. And certainly in New Zealand Story, that's where we spend a lot of our time thinking about the kind of innovation story of New Zealand. How do we share innovation and science and technology in a way that will lift all of these other things? It was mentioned earlier, and Dane Pania is, I think, a large part of the story here too, that Māori culture is very highly perceived in Chinese perceptions of New Zealand. The fact that we have a national culture, the fact that we value it, the fact that we have a multilingual society is actually really of interest. But knowledge is pretty limited about what that means and how that plays out in our day-to-day life. So the Māori culture is a connection point. It was, again, just in the last panel, we were talking about how culture and language builds connection between people. Ultimately, people do business with people. We wrap it up in a thing we call a business, but the reality is, as we all know, guangxi, manaakitanga, these are really important concepts in a social sense as well. So what does all this mean? I'm going to wrap it up quickly. And then I'll touch on a couple of the core sector things as well. In terms of positive associations, there's a huge opportunity to leverage New Zealand's reputation for natural beauty, cleanliness, safety. We know all of that. That's kind of the starting point. In fact, I'm sure all of you are doing that already. But where it gets to be more interesting in my mind, and when you start to really drill into the data, telling them more about the same things they already know does not get you more bang for your buck. What we need to be doing as New Zealand is showcasing more technological opportunities, showcasing some of our science, our technology, our sophistication, things that will help debunk that idea that we're too laid back, and also culture. And as I mentioned, Māori culture is like a bit of a super weapon. If you've gone to China with a kapa haka group, as many of us in the room have, you'll realise what power that can unlock when you showcase your culture in a really authentic way and create a connection through those sorts of aspects. So these are the opportunities for New Zealand. I'll finish with four quick themes in terms of doing business in China. First of all, we have established expertise. We are recognised as having established expertise. These are the sorts of things that we can lean into as Aotearoa New Zealand. Safety and trust is something that's highly recognised and valued. Again, in all the data, it pretty much comes out in every focus group that we do, is that New Zealand is perceived as being safe, trustworthy, etc. This is a huge part of the brand of New Zealand, I think, actually. Bilateral partnerships and relationships, it's not a transactional thing. And again, others on the panel today have been talking about this. It's, we've got to hammer it home. This is not a transactional way of doing business. This is a partnership way of doing business. Leaning into Māori culture, for example, is a way of building that. And one of the superpowers that we sometimes forget in New Zealand, because we live in this environment, is that ease of doing business and that trustworthiness that we have here is part of the value proposition that we have into China. So those are the perceptions of New Zealand, Tim, I'm wrapping up now because I'm trying to keep you on time, and I can feel the hunger in the room for the giveaways and the wine that's going to come later. But this is the perceptions that we have in New Zealand, of New Zealand in China, largely positive, but missing some detail. And if we were to lean into some of these aspects, showcase things that extend information about New Zealand, I think we can further grow it. Thank you very much. 48 seconds.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, David. You've proven why you get given this slot. So well done.
Because I can bring it in at 48 seconds on to time.
Yeah. Just really quickly,
Yes.
New Zealand story. You've shown the reasons why the things that in China what we're known for. But why is it important to have a New Zealand story?
Oh, is there a minister in the room? No. Okay. Well, I mean, the reality is every country has a perception and an image in the world, whether they like it or not. The question is, should you curate that image in a way that creates extra value for you? And so I guess that's a small advanced economy like New Zealand needs to really be thoughtful about how we are perceived by the rest of the world, because we want to build value. The brand of New Zealand is one of our most precious attributes. It's worth about nearly $300 billion US. And that's not my data, that's data from overseas commentators. But what's even more important is that value of the brand of New Zealand, that reputation we have as a country, allows products and services to be worth more. It allows our tourism propositions, our education propositions, etc., to be seen as more valuable because we come from this high trust, high reputation country. So as I say, the question is not, should you have a reputation? We have one. The question is, how do we curate it to get the maximum value out of it?
Awesome. And just before you go anywhere, can you point to the direction of the Our Land bar? Yeah, cool. You pass. That's where we'll be in about 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Can you give David a round of applause, please?